Good evening. I'm Susan Lindsay, Ask Childhood Cancer's Foundation's Program Director. Welcome to our new webinar series, Ask Us About. This virtual discussion series is designed to present topics important to families going through diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship. Our topic this evening is coping with emotions and anxiety. Wherever you are on this journey, we know there have been significant emotional challenges for your entire family. We hope that you come away this evening feeling like you have more tools in your toolbox to proactively support your emotional needs and those of your family as well. A few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording this webinar so that it's available online for those who couldn't make it this evening. We will pause for discussion and comments throughout. If you have a question, you can use the chat feature or the Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbar. If you hover your cursor over it, you'll see there's a chat where you can type in, and then also a Q&A. I'll be monitoring both of those. So we encourage you to ask questions and make comments. If you would like to speak, I can unmute you. If you just raise your hand or say in the chat, hey, I would like to make a comment. I already have one in the Q&A. Let's see. So we, because this is a webinar, Chrissy, and I do that on purpose so that as we do the recording that lives on the internet and on the Ask website, so everybody has access to it. We just feel like it's a little more private for those who maybe don't want it to be online out there in the world. So as a webinar, a Zoom webinar, your video and participants' videos are not on and they're muted. But if you would like to speak and ask a question, if you raise your hand, I can unmute you. But we won't be able to see you. But thank you for joining us. Let's see what else. We will do our best to get all of the questions within the hour. We are excited to have participants register for our webinars from across the state. So welcome to each of you, no matter where you're coming from, to take the time out of your busy schedules to join us. I would like to introduce a couple people this evening. Alma Morgan is ASK's Associate Director of Education. She has been serving childhood cancer patients and their families' educational needs for over 30 years. So thank you, Alma, for joining us this evening. And then it's my pleasure to introduce licensed marriage and family therapist, Ashley Morgan Sukup. Ashley works with children, adolescents, and adults, specializing in post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma, anxiety and depression, and ADHD. Specifically, Ashley assists individuals and families in exploring new patterns of communication and relational engagement to support one another and promote long-lasting change within the family. So welcome, Ashley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
So Ashley, as you know, coping with big emotions and anxiety is something that all families who go through childhood cancer or a serious blood disorder or really any sort of serious pediatric health challenge experience and learn to navigate. We all experience varying degrees of anxiety, but it is a whole other level of frequency and duration and of anxiety and fear and worry when you're dealing with a serious illness of your child. So it's such an important topic to speak openly about. So thank you for being here and helping us do that.
Thank you so much. And I'm super excited to be here and talk to all of you. For those of you who might not know, Alma Morgan is actually also my mom. So I grew up with her, learning a lot about childhood cancer and watching her serve a lot of these families. And it's near and dear to my heart to be able to support and serve each of you as well. I do want to share, Susan and I have done several of these, and I think the most rich discussions and opportunity are if you guys do take advantage of that webinar chat or the Q&A. This time is yours, and I can answer any questions that you guys may have. And it's just more of a rich experience if we're conversational. And I do want to take a second as we're talking about anxiety and emotions. Many of you have endured the absolute unthinkable of challenges and life circumstances. And as we're talking about anxiety, we all struggle with anxiety, but often it's hard to see the forest through the trees. when we are talking about these things, and you guys are actually doing that. So I want you to really be proud of yourselves for your level of resiliency and courage and bravery and what you've endured and experienced thus far, because you're doing it. So we're talking about these feelings and how to cope and how to manage, but I think many of you might be doing it already.
Yes, well said. Thank you. So Ashley, I'd like to start by having you explain what is happening in the brain and body when we experience anxiety. And I think it's important to understand whether it's a parent, child, or sibling who is experiencing anxiety. It kind of gives us a reference point of what is happening to understand.
Yes. So to really talk about, and Susan, do you mind sharing one of my slides for me? We're going to that first one, the stress performance curve. And really to understand truly anxiety and what's happening for everyone, it's really important to recognize that anxiety is a normal emotion. We all actually have it. And when I talk to kids often, I described as swimming. You're sitting on you're going to stand at the edge of a pool, and there's the block, and get on the block, and they say, on your mark, get set, go. You have an option. And in that, you can either jump in the pool and swim, or you can freeze and jump off the block and run away. And that feeling that you feel of, oh my gosh, this is nerve-wracking, or I'm scared, or I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to do it. I might be overwhelmed. I may be stressed. I might be worried. That's anxiety. That is that normal feeling. And ultimately, when we have that, it causes or enables us to take action in those moments. So one of the ways to look at this a little bit differently is there's a stress performance curve that I just indicated and shown to you all. If we don't have any anxiety at all, we're sitting in this green on the bell curve, and that's inactivity, lack of motivation, no desire to engage or do anything. We have too little stress, too little bit of worries or anxiety. Some individuals come across as laid back if they have a little bit of that stuff, and it comes and goes. And as you hit the stress performance curve, that optimum stress level is that idea that we're talking about of on the swim block. I get up, I have a little bit of butterflies, but I jump off the block and I go. I'm going into the hospital. I know that I'm going to have chemo for the day. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a little bit anxious. It's a little bit scary, but I get out of the car and I go. I have that 15 seconds of courage that I like to describe for my little guys. You have 15 seconds of courage or bravery to get out of the car and sit there. But at the end of the day, it gets a little bit better. The anxiety goes away. Where anxiety can be very difficult is when it's sustained long term. So we're hitting the top of this bell curve that we're looking at here, where we have a prolonged levels of anxiety that leads to really truly emotional fatigue, emotional exhaustion. When we sit in that orange kind of red zone for too long, that's where we're experiencing clinical levels of anxiety or panic. So when people say, hey, I'm having panic attacks, I'm starting to feel my chest constricting, and I'm having a hard time breathing, or my heart's racing, or I'm sweating all the time, I feel very tense. That's prolonged levels of anxiety and stress and fear. And that's when we recognize, hey, this might be more difficult, or something we really need to address and deal with. I do want to take a minute too, because anxiety and depression tend to come hand in hand, Susan. So when we're talking about these prolonged levels of anxiety, we have this fatigue, we have this this level of exhaustion because it's just been too much, too high levels of coping with intense emotion. We can really experience this level of burnout. We're often, and it's this idea of like, well, my life's never going to get better. This is really difficult. And that's where we might hit the feelings of worry, hopelessness, lack of motivation, which can present like depression. So that's often why anxiety and depression have a tendency to go hand in hand. Does anybody have any questions about that going forward thus far, about anxiety and kind of what it looks like? And okay.
You want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, that would be great. So this is an anxious brain. So someone just put, can you lose focus? Yes, you can lose focus. And it can look like you're having a difficulty focusing and paying attention. And often, your brain is about this big. Half of the brain is related to feelings, anxiety, worry, fear, happiness, joy, elatement, right? That's this side of your field. The other half is related to, executive functioning strategies, decision-making, focus, attention, working memory. When our brain, because it's only so big, when we get overwhelmed with emotions or anxiety or stress or worry, it has to go somewhere. So it starts creeping into that learning part of your brain, that organization, the planning, the executive functioning skills. And that's why kids and adults even have a hard time, and they might describe when I'm feeling anxious, hey, I'm having a very hard time paying attention. I can't focus in class. I seem to be, my mind's wandering. I might ask the same question over and over and over again, or I look like I'm ignoring people all the time. If you're seeing that at home, there could be attention concerns, but if we know that we're dealing with a high levels of traumatic life events or worries or situational stressors, it could be they're anxious and they're worried and they're scared. They don't know how to process it, and it's coming across as an attention, but really it's worry. So I want to show you about a little bit differently. This is an anxious brain. So the unstressed brain, and I keep using anxiety and stress as interchangeably, and kids more often today than not, they'll say anxiety or I have anxiety. We're decreasing the stigma on mental health, which is pretty cool. But a lot of times they'll say I'm really stressed, or I'm really overwhelmed, or I'm just tired. They'll indicate that a lot too. But when we have an unstressed brain, the prefrontal cortex is this front part of your brain. And that's your like executive functioning, your learning center. That's being able to plan, organize, transition from one task to the next, be able to make effective decisions, problem solve. It's your motivation and reward center. When I'm unstressed, you have information and stimuli throughout the world kind of goes in. It helps you be able to clearly make decisions and plan accordingly. Hey, I'm going to act in this way, or I'm not going to act in this way. I'm motivated, or this isn't something I want to do. I can incorporate these certain experiences in my day, or I cannot. And it goes through the rest of your brain and helps you take action. What happens when we have chronic levels of anxiety or stress or traumatic life events, our amygdala here, that's what tends to get highlighted. That's our fight or flight center. That's our fight or flight response. And when that gets highlighted, that causes you to take action. I'm up on that swimming block. I'm standing there. I'm going to either run away because I'm scared, I'm a flighter, or I'm going to jump in and I'm going to swim. That's my fighting through the anxiety. If we have chronic levels of anxiety too, you might see kids, you'll say when they're little, you walk up and you scare them and you go, boo, right? And they go, ah, and then they kind of kick and scream. That's a fighting brain. If they go, ah, and they run away and they cry, that's a flighting brain. And actually what's really interesting is starting around 0 to 2, one of those first memories of fight or flight is often what kids exhibit long-term. So if your little ones, you recognize they tend to be fighters or flighters when they were very little, they often act that way as they become older children and even adolescents to young adults. But that amygdala, it gets highlighted when we're anxious, and it impedes our ability to utilize our prefrontal cortex. So that fight or flight center gets highlighted when we're stressed or anxious. We get very overwhelmed, and it shuts down that prefrontal cortex. That's our decision-making center, our problem-solving center, our organization and planning center, our motivation and drive center. So we can't think clearly, we can't focus, we can't attend, and we can't engage. And that's often when we look like we're shutting down.
So the question in the chat is, so if you have a child who is experiencing that, they're not able to focus because of their anxiety or stress level, how do you help them?
Yeah, so we will talk about some about a bunch of different strategies further along in the presentation. But really what we're doing is we do need to calm the brain down, and it takes about 20 minutes. So I think depending on how young your child is, we want to identify that this is emotion that's happening. I recognize you're really stressed out. I recognize you're really scared. I recognize you're really worried. What can we do? What can I do as mom or dad or grandparent to help you feel supported and comfortable to calm your brain down? What do you need? Some kids are going to say, hey, I need to take some time. I just need a little bit of time. Okay, go take it. It takes about 20 minutes for a brain to calm down and be able to cool down enough to think and rationally or accordingly. So go take that 20 minutes. I'm going to come back in and check on you. Do you need a hug? Some kids who are the fighters, they have that anxiety, and anxiety is energy, right? Like I'm having this ball of stress and tension in my body, and I need to release it. They might need to be the ones that are, hey, you look like you're really stressed. You're having a hard time. I want you to go run a lap around the house, or I want you to punch this pillow, or I want you to yell as loud as you can in your closet, because that's where you can do. I have a little one. a little girl that had a lot of trauma and stress related to a sibling who had chronic illness. And she did not want to talk about it at all. So she kept coming into my office and she was really angry. And she was one of those ones that you could see her little fist getting balled up consistently, and she wouldn't talk. And one day I looked at her and was like, we got to do something about this. And I started talking to her and I go, when I get really mad, it's really hard for me to let it out. And I had markers in my hand, and the door behind me, I just started chucking markers at the wall. And she looks at me like I'm nuts. And I was like, well, I might be a little nuts, but I'm chucking. I'm like, it starts making me feel better. You want to try it? And she starts throwing these markers. And eventually she's kind of starts giggling. But then as she's throwing, she's like, I'm really mad that my brother's having a hard time. And I hate that my mom's gone all the time. And I'm sad that I don't get to see them as much as I want to. And I'm worried about him, and I'm worried about my family, and I miss them. And she just started talking. And what was happening is we were releasing that emotion, we were releasing that energy, and it gave her enough space in her brain to be able to focus and intend on what she was actually having a hard time talking about. Another piece of that is it was really also distracting her from having to vocalize or the words in a way that made sense to her, because that's really hard for little ones. So if we distract them with an activity rather than focusing on me, as we were having a conversation, it de-escalated the experience for her to be able to talk. So big picture is, your children better than anybody. So when they're anxious or they're having a hard time or they're really stressed out, are they ones that need that time, that space, that calming, taking deep breaths, taking a hot shower, drinking a cold glass of water, practicing deep breaths, drawing or coloring? Are they the ones like this little girl that I'm describing that really need to release some energy and get that energy out?
Ashley, do you find that sometimes kids, depending on their age, don't recognize that they're experiencing anxiety? Like, we as adults maybe have the self-awareness to be like, oh, I'm I'm really anxious about this, or but maybe kids don't identify that feeling in their bodies.
Absolutely. Emotional identification. If we want to go down to the second slide here, Susan, the next slide, emotional identification is like key to this. And that's a learned behavior. So we have to teach them how to identify feelings. And this is a wheel. So in the center of this, and it's hard to see a little bit, but there's these are the primitive emotions. But as it moves out, all these little spots on this wheel are different emotions that we experience at any given time. That's a lot, and that's really overwhelming. So for kids, what we tend to only teach is I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad, right? So when kids come home, particularly little ones, did you have a good day? No, it was bad. Why? Sometimes they don't even know. I'm like, and I'm just really mad, and they act out and they lash out. We as adults, it's our job to teach them of like, hey, what's your worry? What's that underneath layer that's coming? I'm not just angry all the time, right? Underneath that anger, that's the primitive emotion. Underneath the anger is I'm disappointed, I'm fearful, I'm scared, I'm frustrated, I'm worried, I'm overwhelmed. And asking them, you identify those by modeling that. It looks like you might be really overwhelmed by what happened with your friend today at school, or it looks like you might be really scared about what's coming up tomorrow. Or, hey, I'm feeling really scared about X, Y, and Z, or I'm really worried about X, Y, and Z. Have you ever felt that way? Giving them that language is what helps ultimately to be able to manage the emotions, but they have to learn to identify them first.
I feel like I often hear the advice to identify the feeling in the body, like where you're feeling anxiety or where you're feeling anger. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is that a recommendation?
Yes, because we do carry our emotions and we in our body, right? And in our experiences, and we carry different emotions in different ways. So it's this mind-body connection, right? If I know what I'm feeling, it's a good gauge on what I'm experiencing and how I'm experiencing it. So for example, I'm recognizing that my heart is beating very quickly and very fast, and I'm starting to sweat. What's happening to me? Then I go, oh my gosh, like I recognize like this is not normal, right? I can feel that more than I can identify the emotion. This isn't normal. I'm really uncomfortable. Well, once I know that, then I know what I need to do to feel better. Hey, if my heart's racing really badly, what do I need to do? I think I need to start taking some deep breaths. I take those deep breaths and I start calming down. Hey, I'm feeling really sweaty. I might need to go take a walk and get some air, take a break. And once I do that, when you're calmed down, when that brain after 20 minutes is calmed down, that's more of an opportunity for a parent or a loved one or a caregiver to say, hey, I recognized when your heart was racing, you said your heart was racing or you're sweating or you're having a difficult time. What was happening for you in that moment? The key is what was happening, not what was wrong with you or what was going on, what was happening for you because they were experiencing something. That's the moment, Mom, I was really, this happened. And that's when you can say, well, that must mean that you were scared or you were worried or you were stressed out. They can identify their event. We get to help them based on their body identifying the emotion. Is that making sense? In my body, if I'm saying, hey, I'm feeling these heart sweating and mind racing, I'm scared or anxious. When I'm really angry, my fists ball up. I get really tense in my fists, right? Or I feel my cheeks and my jaw getting really tense. That's an anger emotion. If we can start putting language towards that as they get older, they can start recognizing that for themselves.
That makes sense. Thanks. Our Ask families have a lot of emotional triggers that are specific to diagnosis and treatment, and that whole experience. Can you speak a little bit about medical trauma, which is probably a term most people had never heard of until they found themselves, entering the world of childhood cancer or chronic blood disorder?
Yes. If you don't mind, we have one more slide for that. So I'll pull that up so people can look at it. So trauma is really it's a term used for a disturbing or distressing event that impacts you physically, emotionally, or psychologically. And there's acute traumas. So that's an event that occurs at a particular time or place. It could be usually short lived. So examples, job loss, sudden loss of a loved one, natural disaster. And they are usually cause overwhelming feelings of terror, horror, helplessness, intense fear. And really the difference with an acute trauma is there's a beginning and there's an end to it. I can identify that this point in time, this happened to me and it was very particularly distressing, but I can chunk it. Complex trauma is an exposure to a repeated trauma over long periods of time. Identity is continual abuse or domestic violence are examples. And again, it's intense fear, loss of trust in others, decreases sense of personal safety, guilt, and shame. So for you all, as you know, you guys are experiencing these medical traumas. It would be really difficult for you to define whether or not it's acute or complex. Because when we're dealing with childhood cancer, there's not a linear path to that. So we can be diagnosed and then we go through chemo and it could be fine. Maybe we could also, go through and have multiple different stints in the hospital, or we could have a major setback that's impacted. And all those different points in our experience in our journey could be moments of trauma that would cause complex or chronic trauma that you're experiencing. So that's really hard to differentiate for anybody, whether it's acute or complex, and it's determined for individuals based on how they are experiencing their childhood cancer diagnosis in that event. And truly, it might be different for the child who's experiencing it, as well as the parent or the sibling, because different moments in that time or that experience could be perceived or impact them differently. One thing I want to make sure that everybody is aware, and I had an individual in my office, we were talking about trauma yesterday, she said, I just feel like, my journey has been relatively simple and easy. And I almost feel ashamed that I'm as traumatized or as impacted and affected by this as I'm presenting, because other people have it so much worse. And I was explaining to her, I go, some people can have one really, really awful event that's impacted them and is very short-lived. But oftentimes individuals who had those little bouts or those little moments in time, and they tend to add up and they're chronic, or they're almost harder for people to get over. And that's why when we have complex trauma, it tends to be more long lasting and impactful than an individual who has a cause. This had like a short linear sequence of events, and this was a chunk of time that was difficult for me, and I was able to move on.
I would imagine that most families going through diagnosis and treatment, it's a and maybe this is kind of what you were saying, it's a combination of both. Like they're experiencing both acute trauma and complex trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, if you want to flip to this slide here, I found this through, Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, several years ago when I was presenting for some educators about this. This is an interesting graph because it denotes children and their perspective of experiencing whether it's cancer, injury, cardiac, or transplant, versus the parents. And as you can see, in most cases, the parents were impacting and experiencing trauma more than even the child was. And I think part of that is because the parents are impacted, like the child is swimming, right? And I keep using these swimming analogies, so I don't know what that says about me looking forward to summer, but as you're in the pool and the kid's swimming, they're in survival mode. They're trying to get through, right? And they're doing it. As parents, you guys have such an awareness in the world of what this diagnosis means for your child and all the potential implications of how it could impact someone, and how it's going to affect them, whether it's with their schooling or long-term cognitive late effects of it, or their ability to be able to walk or run or do the things that they want to do. You're seeing it all from like a top-down worldview, and you're living it on your own, and that is complex. But when the child's in it and they're in survival mode and they're just trying to get through, they're living day to day. And oftentimes as they move past it and then they get through the treatment, they look up and they go, oh my gosh, that just happened to me. And that's when their trauma experience can come. So I would love to see, and I don't think any data has ever been put on this, would children describe it because they're in it and they're in this constant state of survival mode? Are they in it and they're experiencing it as more of an acute experience because it's such a chunk of time for them, and they don't have that top-down worldview, where parents would be more likely to denote it as a complex or acute trauma, like complex chronic trauma.
Interesting. That's a really interesting. That makes a lot of sense. So, now that I feel like we have a pretty good like overview of what's happening in the body and all of that foundational understanding. Let's talk about some tools for processing big emotions and anxiety so that the next time, a procedure or a scan or a fever happens or whatever that trigger is, everybody has a few more tools in their toolbox at hand.
Mm-hmm. You said something really important to the idea of a trigger. So whether, when they go into a hospital, right, and this is all part of the trauma piece, when they go into the hospital, they're smelling smells that they might not like and they're associating with a negative event. They're hearing bells and whistles and things going off in the intercom that they might associate with a negative event. Those are all being ingrained in their auditory stores. And in our brain, we file visual experiences differently and visual memories differently in a different location than we file those auditory processing and memories. And oftentimes, particularly if your children are little, like before age 6, they have a hard time linking those up. So what happens is you might then have a child who's successfully survived all their treatment and their diagnosis. They go back to school, they get into a classroom and they smell a smell that is very familiar to the hospital. And they might have panic. They might have anxiety. They might have acute stress and trauma because it's being triggered. And that's a very difficult piece. And that's where a lot of these, not just in the hospital, but as we move forward, if we can create a foundation of really effective emotional regulation strategies and coping skills, they'll last them long-term as they're going through their life and they're back in school and they're surviving and they're going to work and all the things. So some of those, I want you guys to take a second. I'm actually going to do one with you. So if you want to go to slide 6, Susan, I want you guys to take a second and imagine, you can shut your eyes or you can look up. I want you to imagine a place, and it could be real or imagined, where you feel the absolute safest. Some people pick the beach, some people pick their bedrooms. Now I want you to identify in your head, what do you see there? What do you hear? What can you touch around you? What do you taste? And what can you smell? Now I want you to come back to, and I want you to really acknowledge, how do you feel? And if you guys want to type that in the chat, how do you feel when you go through that exercise? Calmer, a little bit more relieved, a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more relaxed. So when kids come into me with extreme anxiety or stress, I tell them they might be going to their safe place all day long. And this is a wonderful one, whether they're having a hard time getting out of the car to go into the hospital for their test, or they're having a particularly difficult time with the scan, or they are having to go encounter an experience even with a friend that they're having a hard time. This can be used at baseline with anything to take them out of the space that's making them having a hard time. It distracts them from their worries and fears, and it puts them in a place where they're calm and they're peaceful. And what we're doing, if we want to take it back to that picture of the brain, we're calming the brain down to be able to have a place where we can think and associate clearly. A couple other ways that are really effective to be able to do that. They describe an object. So I had a little girl who she had a very, very difficult time going to school, and she would get intense panic attacks when she had to get out of the car. And I told her, okay, we're not worried about going to school. As you walk in, I want you to count every brick on the sidewalk as you're walking. And what she did, she counted every brick, and she came back and she goes, there was like 547 bricks from like my car to the front door. And I go, that was very specific, but you did. And I go, did you get into class? She goes, yeah, I did. And it just gave her enough of a distraction to be able to get into the building and recognize I made it. I got there. And there was an internal sense of resiliency and pride. And I said, all right, so tomorrow, if you need to do that, we're going to do it. And that's going to be awesome. And then I want you to count like the posters from the front door to your first class. And she counts the posters. So that's another opportunity for you all as you're going in and you're transitioning and struggling with things. Distraction is a really great mechanism, and putting them onto something that they can actually do. So counting is really effective, or things that they can look at. If they're really little and they're having a hard time with like the counting piece, looking at the clouds can be really nice. Like, hey, I see a puppy dog in the clouds. What do you guys see? Did you see that giant bird that just flew over? Oh my gosh, he looked huge. Like, distraction in that kind of way of like looking at their surroundings can also be really helpful. The glitter jar, that's a grounding because technique in some ways, but there's a picture here on that. If you shake up a glitter jar, it starts at the bottom, we shake it up and it gets stuck to the side. It takes about 20 minutes for that glitter jar to settle. That is a depiction and a metaphor for you all's brains, adults and children alike. When I'm overwhelmed, I'm struggling, I'm super stressed out, I need to give myself 15 to 20 minutes to calm down and settle. I want to encourage you all, as your kids are struggling with anxiety and stress and they're really having a hard time, rushing them from one event to the next is not going to be effective, and it's going to be very frustrating for you all because their brain is already hypervigilant and struggling, and we're going, hey, you got to just suck it up and get through it. Yes, they do, but they might be in an emotional state of panic and distress where they truly can't put one foot in the front of the other. So let's give them 15 to 20 minutes. Let's give them that flexibility of, okay, you can watch a little bit more of your show before we have to go brush your teeth, or we have to walk out of the car, or, hey, let's listen to some music a little bit longer before we have to go in or get there. Or sure, you can have one more popsicle and we can sit here and we can have a chat before it's time to do things. Practicing, we're firm but flexible boundaries. We have to do the thing to get through it, and teachers you that you can get through it, but we also need to give them a little flexibility and grace on how we get to that process. And it might need 15 to 20 minutes to be able to calm down. That won't be forever. The more they practice these tools and they use these strategies and they trust themselves that they can conquer the experience, the better off they're going to be. Deep breathing is a great one. For little ones, if you put a stuffed animal on their belly and they take a deep breath and they watch the stuffed animal move on their belly and then kind of move back up, it's showing they're taking deep breaths. I love this one with my hands, and my older guys do this. You count your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a mechanism, a distraction mechanism, and it's very tactile, sensory, so it can help and be calming as well. Cold drinks of water. If they're at home, shooting basketball hoops can be really effective, or going outside, riding a scooter if they're anxious. That's another distraction. It's releasing energy. Drawing or coloring, reading books. I put taking a nap ? With a bold, because I hear a lot of my teens say, I'm really stressed out, or I'm really overwhelmed. Like, well, what are you doing? I'm just taking a nap. I just want to have them take a nap. It's a very passive way to manage stress and anxiety. And they might be, if they're at like a level 10 as like the highest for anxiety, or level 9, that might be all that they can manage in those moments. But we want to encourage, when they're more of like a level 6 or a level 7, to do one of these other strategies that we're discussing, to learn that they can take action to release the emotion. Because when we're passive and we have all, we're just sleeping, we're not actually dealing with the problem, we're dealing with the anxious event.
That reminds me of in a previous talk that we did, Ashley, you talked about avoidance and why that is not a coping mechanism for anxiety, because it's kind of a natural reaction, right? If something's making you anxious or stressed, you want to avoid it. But that is not always actually a good coping mechanism.
No, it's really not. It's not, because in your brain, if we avoid it, yes, we feel better in the moment, right? Oh, I don't have to do that now, but we're always going to have to do that thing again. And then when we avoid it, it just makes the bigger thing, it makes it bigger. Like, we're compounding the anxiety, we're compounding the fear. So we have to teach them 15 seconds of courage. Like, yes, this is going to be really scary and really anxiety provoking for the first 15 seconds. And then you're going to do it, and your brain and your body are going to kick in, and you're going to recognize, like, I've got this. I'm literally putting one foot in the front of the other. Doing it with them, engaging in that activity with them, can also be very helpful, because they're not doing it alone. But getting them there and teaching them that they need to tolerate it to some level to start, is way better than the avoidance tactic. We see that a lot with school refusal and school avoidance is huge. Particularly for kids who had not been there before. They haven't been there for an extended period of time, and they're not sure what their friends are going to think about them, or make fun of them or tease them. They don't know if everybody's moved on and kind of forgotten about them. That's a very anxiety provoking time and experience. But the more we avoid school, the more those worries and fears are getting bigger in their head. So even if you just, hey, I want you to walk into the front door and then you can go home, that's better than them sitting at home and full. Or I want you to get through one class and see how that goes, or the first 30 to 45 minutes, and then I want you to see how that goes. That's better than not going at all.
Thinking of overall mental health, I love your three-legged stool metaphor. Can you share that with us?
Yes, and I actually put a slide up.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I think
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to get the slideshow to work without it being on a timer, so I apologize.
No, that's totally okay. Well, I appreciate you too, because I'm not great with technology. So I a three-legged stool, and I think I'm getting older, because I look at my guys, I'm like, have you ever seen a three-legged stool? And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But really, your life is like a three-legged stool. And each of these pivotal moments are the things that you value that are important to you. So, one might be, hey, I have school or work, and then I have my family and my friends and my social, and then I have myself. In order for a three-legged stool to work, it has to be fully balanced. So if I'm, overarching in my school, and I'm overworking at school and work, what's going to happen? My stool's going to tip over. Okay, well then we can't have it tip over. It had to be balanced. So we then had to look at what else do we need to do, or put on our plate, or put on our stool, and those other two legs to rebalance it. So, hey, I'm really tipping heavy. I'm spending a lot of time socially, a lot of time with friends, a lot of time doing schoolwork and homework. What did I forget? I forgot about myself. So I had to practice that self-care. Maybe I do need to stay in and read my book, or maybe, I've got a lot of things piling up, and a lot of worries, and a lot of fears, and a lot of anxiety, and a lot of stress. That's a lot on your plate. What are we going to put on your plate to take care of you? You know what? Tonight, I need to do nothing. I just need to go to bed, take a hot shower, read a book, watch a movie, and go to sleep. Okay, you get full permission to be able to do that. And it's taking a pulse of what you need for yourself, in order to be able to effectively manage the emotions.
So I do want to say, we realize for those who are with us and who may be listening to this recording later that, when you're going through treatment, you are in crisis mode. And so balancing your stool may feel like it's just impossible, because you have to be at the hospital or the clinic and your stool is going to be cattywampus for a while. But Ashley, can you share even just like really, really small things that maybe people can think about doing to try to help balance it?
Yes, I think the big picture is the biggest one, I think, is giving yourself grace. Because I feel like when people are in such a state of crisis and struggling and they're doing all the things and they are overwhelmingly balanced, there's a lot of guilt and shame about what they're not doing and who they aren't spending time with or who they're not engaging with or what activities that are falling or slipping. And you all need to give yourself a lot of grace and recognizing you're going through something that's very difficult and truly the unthinkable. And let's give you enough grace to be able to say, hey, I'm going to take care of me. And I might have to say no to things right now, but they will go. They will be okay. You will survive if we don't do those things. These other people will survive and they'll understand if you don't do those things. And finding little bits of time. It's being preemptive and proactive. So while you're sitting there and you're in the hospital and you're super overwhelmed, what do you put in the bag for you? So you might have all the snacks and all the gear and everything for the kids. What do we do for us? To be able to, maybe I do put a book in, maybe I do a crossword puzzle. Maybe I remember to bring my favorite candy bar for me because that's important. That's going to bring me joy. Like finding little bits of things, moments and things that puts you on the plate because really, truly, you can't take a lot off.
We have a little bit of time, so I did want to touch on, this could be a whole separate webinar. I want to preface this, it's a big topic. But I think it's important to touch on grief and loss because everyone experiences loss, the loss of normal, the loss of, maybe friendships that you don't survive the experience of going through childhood cancer, the loss of maybe a friend who is going through cancer, or maybe their own loss in their family. And so I wanted to touch on that and a little bit about grief and maybe the difference between depression and grief, and knowing when is it time to get help, and what is grief, just normal grief that is, a human experience.
Yeah. So grief is an emotion where that encompasses sadness, denial, worry, questioning, bargaining, intense anger. And ultimately a healthy grief process is about 12 to 18 months. One of the big pivotal differences between grief and bereavement as well and depression is that when we're grieving, we're going through all these emotions. They're very much like a web. We might feel multiple ones at the same time. We might say, hey, I got through the questioning and bargaining and the guilt and the worry and the fear stage, and I'm at anger. And then here comes sadness and worry and anger and fear again, right? So we are in this and it's a web and it's not truly linear. The key piece to that is we still have moments of joy, moments of happiness, moments of pleasure, can identify positive memories and emotions. When we get into the state of depression, we are experiencing intense feelings of sadness, intense feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, worry, and we are unable to see the positives in life, right? We're not able to acknowledge that anything in life is really good, or I may rationally recognize it. I don't feel it, and I have a hard time experiencing it. I don't laugh the way that I used to. Things that used to cause me intense pleasure don't bring me any joy or any pleasure anymore. And those are really the key differences between depression and grief. And oftentimes, when we are grieving, we have these short bouts and moments of depression that are in hopelessness and sadness. And it's really important for all of you to be able to acknowledge when you need help or when you're struggling, and be able to ask for help and communicate those feelings in the moment.
In the chat, there's a comment. I definitely feel losing a child. There's no timeline on grief more than any other loss. I have lost a parent, friend, cousin, etc. Nothing compares.
I think you are 100,000% correct. And it is going to change you and your life will never feel normal. But the big key to this is doing the work and putting things in place to be able to identify a new normal, even though recognizing that you are going to be grieving for the rest of your life. I truly do believe that. But in those moments and in that grief, are you able to pick up, find joy with the people in your life that you love and that you care about, that you feel joy with, and create a story for yourself and a narrative for yourself that's positive despite the negative experience. And that's the big, that's the big piece with trauma too. And when people come in, and I would probably argue, I don't know if you can lose and I haven't lost a child, but I don't know if you can lose a child and truly not experience a traumatic event. I think losing a child is traumatic for anybody. And it's that physical, emotional, psychological, deep loss. And the best way to get through trauma is really creating a new narrative and a new story outside of that awful, awful experience, and giving yourself an opportunity to look for those positive moments and rewrite a story for them. What is their legacy? What are their memories? What are the positive ones? How are you going to carry that legacy on for them? Because you deserve that. And they gave you so much, and they're going to give the world so much in that way.
I see the chat and the comments about not being able to get into counseling because the wait list is so long. I'm assuming Full Circle has such a long wait list that they haven't been able to get in. Is that, which I know is in the mental health world is such a challenge. I don't know, Ashley, if you have any suggestions for finding available counseling without having to wait a year.
Yes. And is this for bereavement?
Yeah.
Current. So I know NOAA's does through CHORE, they do some bereavement work and services and supports for families. And where I am presently at Summit Emotional Health, we contract with them to help with some of that. And we do have individuals here on staff that do love to do this work and have a passion for helping families. I think if you're really having a hard time, give me a call and I can connect you with someone, because I don't think you should have to wait. Comfort Zone can be really helpful for kids too. And one of the things for parents, I want you to be mindful, particularly if there's siblings, you're grieving and you're having a very hard time. The sibling of that individual is also grieving, but that experience might be very different for them. So where you might want to talk about it and process it and think and be in therapy and think they need it, I oftentimes have siblings that come in and they're like, I need to talk about it like this much, but then I don't want to talk about it anymore. And it's a start of, hey, you can come in, we'll start a relationship, and it's 1 or 2 sessions. And then, you go on about your business and your day. And then when something pops up developmentally and we're having a hard time again, based on life stages and what they're experiencing, we can pop in for another 1 or 2, 3 sessions, and establish a relationship, based on what they're needing in the moment. But I'm happy, Susan, if we can connect with that individual and help get them some supports for sure.
Yeah, I will follow up with you. Do we any other questions or comments?
Does anybody, are you all familiar? I can get you my PowerPoint, or you can send it.
I'll send out a follow-up email to everyone and I'll include the PowerPoint in it.
Okay. Do you all know signs of anxiety? So if I said, hey, when does the anxiety become so difficult that we need to seek support for that? I think it might be beneficial for me to share some of those. If your child or you are finding that you're having a hard time concentrating on a daily basis, not just with things that are particularly boring, our sleeping has changed. We're either sleeping way more than we typically do, or we're having a hard time falling asleep or a hard time staying asleep. Those are big signs. Intense bad dreams are often very consistent with a traumatic life event or night terrors. Eating, we're either eating way more than we do historically, or we're having a hard time eating, is another sign of anxiety. Quick trigger anger and irritability. And what happens with that is when we're anxious, we're overwhelmed and we're overstimulated. If I'm dealing with those emotions and then somebody goes, hey mom, can you help me with my project? And what? because I'm in my head worrying about things, and I'm quickly angry or irritable. And then sometimes feeling we're really out of control during these outbursts. And you'll often see that a lot of times in young children, and even middle schoolers, because they don't have that emotional regulation capacity to manage their emotions. They just all pile on, and I can't make sense of them. So I like release them, and I react. Constantly worrying or having negative thoughts, and sometimes they don't even make any sense. So I had a little boy, and this one actually did make a ton of sense. He came in, his mom had breast cancer about 1.5 years ago. And he's always kind of had a little bit of anxiety. But he came and he was having a hard time with going to school and leaving her. And he was terrified that something bad was going to happen to her, but it was popping up at school with, I'm worried that this kid's mad at me, or I'm worried that the teacher's going to be upset with me. So I don't ask her for help because she might think I'm bad. And when they came into session, the parents all thought it was school related. And he was really anxious because he had these intrusive thoughts and worries about school. But when we got down to it, I go, what are you really worried about every day? And well, why don't you want to go to school? Why don't I want to leave my mom? Well, why don't you want to leave my mom? Because I'm worried that something's going to bad happen to her. I'm worried she's going to die. And he had to be able to process that. And then he did. And we spent 45 minutes having a conversation and talking about, unfortunately for a 10-year-old, death and dying and what that would mean and what would happen to him and the big worries that he had in his head. And then he went to school and he never worried anymore at school because he was able to process and talk about it and get it out. So that's really important for you all. Sometimes the anxiety and what they're saying they're worried or anxious about isn't actually the problem. It's just a symptom of the problem. Feeling tense and fidgety, reckless, like I'm going to just like climb out of my skin. Kids might look really hyperactive, and acting out, running around, high energy, climbing on things. Often you'll hear, particularly social anxiety for little ones, like they're totally fine at home and then they go out into the world and you think that like they've gotten like smacked by the Tasmanian devil, like they're just all over the place. That can be an anxiety symptom. Very, very tearful, consistently is another sign, as well as being clingy to caregivers or parents, or even other siblings is one that can be difficult. Another big one is complaining of tummy aches, headaches, and then there's no explained cause. So if any of these are happening, give it a few days, a few weeks. If it's consistently happening, I would encourage you to go talk to your pediatrician. They're always the first line of defense, and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we've experienced. They know your story and your journey. And then they can also then provide you with resources and supports, to be able to get you the services you all need.
Any last questions, comments?
I saw somebody said, yes, these are definitely happening. If they are definitely happening, you are the person that your child loves the most. And you are the one that can influence them more than any other. And they hear you. Sometimes they don't act like they hear you, but they hear you. So if you went home and you said, hey, I just listened to this talk and it was all about worries and fears. And you know what? I feel really worried and I feel kind of scared about things, and that this is what happens to me. Does that ever happen to you? They're probably going to sit down and have a conversation with you about it. Give them the language. They might shut down, but I doubt it. Give them the language, and by using and modeling how to communicate about it to them, and say, I think maybe I'm going to try X, Y, and Z tool and trick that we talked about tonight. Would you like to try that with me? And see if that helps. You are also the most important person. And I know I'm asking a lot for you all who are in and out of the hospital and busy and struggling with things. But if you can try to carve out 10 to 15 minutes every night around bedtime and sit down and talk about the weather, like we're not talking about big deal worries or fears or sadness and all the things. We're just talking about mundane topics. It will go a long way in decreasing the anxiety for them, because we're giving them their time. And they know that then they have an opportunity to come to you when they need it.
One thing we do in my family that we started years ago, when my kids were a lot younger, they're 13 now, is that we at dinner, I'm not going to say we sit down every single night together for dinner, but when we do sit down together, we do good, bad, good. And we will each go around and say a good thing that happened in the day, a bad thing about the day, and then end with another good thing. So we're ending on the positive. And it's been really interesting because sometimes you will think, like, the way they came home from school or whatever, that it was just like the worst day ever. And by dinner time, they're like, good, good, good. They don't even have a bad. Or conversely, sometimes it'll be bad, bad, bad. But it gives you just like a really nice, you feel like you have your finger on the pulse of kind of what's going on or what's happened.
When I don't know about you, Susan, but we play similar. We play high low, and what's the high of the day and what's the low of the day. And I often think, I guess I don't know why I think this, but I think that their high is going to be something like hanging out with their friends or doing something really. And sometimes they're like, my high of the day was like eating dinner with you guys. Like, I really like dinner. I'm like, okay, like, thanks. That's really awesome. Or my high of the day was like just coming, like, seeing you today, Mom. I'm like, all right, that's kind of cool. So, things that they might kind of come out with that are the high. And sometimes the things that they come out with the low, I'm like, what in the world? But they're a lot smaller and simpler than what you would imagine. And that tells us they just want to be loved. They don't need all the big deal things. They just want to know that they're loved and they're cared for. And you guys are doing that. So.
It is 7:58, so I'm going to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, or if you're watching this recording later, thanks for watching. We hope that you leave feeling like you're part of a community of support, that you have more tools in your toolbox to manage your own mental health and support the mental health of your partner and or children. This is our last webinar of 2023. We're going to take a break during December because the holiday season is so busy, but we will return on Thursday, January 11th. The topic will be Ask Us About Positivity with Education Support Navigator, Lisa Mears. So before coming to Ask, Lisa was a social emotional special education teacher. And she just has a really beautiful way of meeting challenging emotions with positivity. And so we thought it would be a great way to start the new year. So save the date for that. We hope to see you again on January 11th. And thank you again. I will send out a follow-up email to those who are with us tonight with the slide deck. And I will follow up Chrissy with Ashley's information also. Thank you guys and have a great evening.